Hold on one second. My clicker, I moved it here so I can move my screen. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today are what are seeds, a little bit of the history of seed saving, why we should save seeds, some methods used to collect seeds, which species are worth saving, seed storage techniques, seed stratification process, and seed germination test. So, what is a seed? A seed is a flowering plant's unit of reproduction that can develop into another plant. And as we're thinking about that, how long have humans really been saving seeds? So it's at least 12,000 to 13,000 years ago marked the shift from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to permanent settlements and the deliberate cultivation of plants. Wheat was the first domesticated from wild ember wheat around 10,000 to 8,000 BC in the Fertile Crescent, which includes modern day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. The Incas advanced agricultural practices significantly, creating sophisticated irrigation systems and terraces to cultivate diverse crops. The Inca grew staple crops like potatoes, of which they cultivated thousands of varieties, corn, quinta, along with a variety of other vegetables, fruits, and medicinal plants, such as tomatoes, chili peppers, avocados, peanuts, squash, sweet potatoes, beans, and coca leaves. So, how this really helps us, it's the practice of saving botanical reproductive material for agriculture, farm, and home gardens, right? So, when we do this, we're really talking about saving seeds that are from grain or herbs or flowers. And for trees, we really can collect the nuts, the tree fruits, and berries. So, why do you think it's important to save seeds? And this is a time if you want to drop something in the chat on why you think it should be important to save seeds. We can kind of look at that. But some of the reasons behind this is that we know we can save money if we save some of the garden seeds from our own plants and flowers. We can be self-reliant if we need, if we're short on income coming in, this is a way for us to generate money that can save us on our food budgets. And it can be fun. We might have this really fun color that was hybridized, and we want to save it to share it with friends and family members. One of the reasons why we also want to save some of our seeds is that we can select for certain characteristics, right? We want items that maybe had a tremendous yield potential. The size of them, they might be a larger size than we've normally ever had or been able to grow. The aroma, they might be very fragrant, and we want to save and capture some of these seeds to grow for just that aroma. Color patterns, texture, the flavor, and also the shape might be those desirable characteristics that we're wanting to save. As you can see, even on the zinnias, these double zinnias, we want to save it because this is a unique hybridized color that we're looking at, and we want to keep capture and grow again next year. Part of what we also want to save seed is to promote our agrobiodiversity. The act of saving seeds really preserves genetic diversity, which is essential for maintaining the health and resilience of crops. Policies that promote agricultural biodiversity strengthens our food security, fosters climate resilience, and boosts the local economy by supporting livelihoods of local communities and farmers. The 5 plants we grow most, according to the Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations, are wheat, rice, sugarcane, corn, soy, potato, palm oil, sorghum, millet, uh, ground nuts, and sweet potato. We rely on buffalo, cattle, chicken, goats, and pigs as humans in part of our agriculture and food diets. Another way to do this is really why people want to save certain seeds or save seeds that are locally raised is restoring and keeping that local knowledge. It may be a culture and a skill set of some of the food producers. We save seed, it connects people to their food, history, and cultural heritage by preserving some of those heirloom varieties and the knowledge associated with them. And we know that our family members, it can build our community and be a family tradition if we're saving some of those heirloom seeds that our families have had for years and years. We also know that the resilience for unpredictable environmental changes, seed saving remains a crucial tool for food security, especially in the face of climate change. There might be a sudden insect infestation. There might be a disease or drought conditions. There's also, just safeguarding if there's a food illness or foodborne outbreak, we would have that security to be able to grow some of those true seeds. We can also share seeds to our family and friends in need. They may want an heirloom variety opposed to maybe a hybrid variety because they know traditionally how that's going to grow and how they can see the size of it going to be. We can use isolation techniques whenever we're wanting to share seeds and collect seeds. We can harvest. We can have proper storage whenever we're thinking about how we're going to store our seeds that we collect this season. And then we also want to think about creating seed libraries or community gardens. A lot of our libraries have seed swaps, extension. Some of my master gardeners also want to do seed swaps or plant swaps. And this is a great way to bring those heirloom varieties or those desirable plants back out into your community. It's also a great way for specialty growers, especially cut grower for flowers, to have some seed saving techniques in their portfolio. Right, they can rely on that unique color. This was a ballerina that we grew. It was actually from Johnny's seeds, but it's a great color. It has a great form. It has a great prolific habit of having lots of harvest. So it has a lot of desirable traits. It also has desirable traits if you want them to stand out at a farmer's market or being sold to florists. You might want a trait to have a longer stem, be a very vibrant bloom, or have a very long vase life. So we preserve rare or hard to find varieties by keeping some of those seeds. We also might be keeping seeds to help grow our customers' favorite that might not always be commercially available. They may be only released every couple years. And so you can kind of save to have that as another source. We should also think about saving heirlooms and not some of the hybrid seeds. Heirloom plants are open pollinated. That means that they reproduce naturally over time, so they adapt to our local conditions and evolve as reliable performers. Seeds saved will be like the parent plant, and so they are chosen because they choose those typical fruits. They're going to be reliable and have that same outcome every time that they're planted. Sometimes why hybrid seeds aren't as desirable might be that they're grown from seeds of two pure parent lines. The parent plants are not similar, um, but they combine to create a desirable trait. Traits last one generation, and seeds harvested from these hybrids may produce disappointing results that are not true to type, or they might even be sterile, which means that they're not productive. Another reason to think about hybrid seeds is hybrid seeds and plants are commercially available. They're labeled on seed packets as hybrid or F1 generation. Seeds can be sterile, and they may even have patents to them that say that you shouldn't be collecting or keeping these seeds. Um, the biggest problem, though, is that they will not always produce true copies or the same variety. So, some of the legality of seed saving is that the farmer's, it's originally the farmer's privilege or grower's privilege to save seeds to grow subsequent crops and was considered protected by the Plant Variety Protection Act of 1970. American farmers could sell seeds up to the amount saved for replanting of their own acreage. So while this allows farmers to save seeds for on farm use, you cannot sell or transfer them to others. So another thing we need to think about is that between the 1980s and mid 2010s, changes in technology and law were established, and genetically modified or engineered seeds were introduced in 1996. And these are patented seeds that cannot legally be saved. So GMO seeds are being patented. They're purchased and purchasing them from like the contractor involves a contract that prevents you from saving and replicating them. So utility patents provide the strongest protection and prohibit the saving, replanting, or selling of patented seeds for 20 years. So this is a reason why, even though we're getting close to that marker of them being maybe released, we have to have all of those patent laws obeyed. Open source seed initiative. So what you need to look for is for the Open Source Seed Initiative OSSI designation, which indicates seeds are dedicated to the public domain with no restrictions on saving, breeding, or use. So this is the website. You can look for some more information, but this is dedicated to maintaining fair and open access to plant genetic resources worldwide, and in order to ensure the availability of germplasm to farmers, gardeners, breeders, and communities of this and future generations. But today you guys are here probably because we want to share some examples of easy plants that we can save seeds from. And that may be some of our vegetable garden plants that we adore, like the snap peas here. Snap peas are in the legume family, and we know that they have harvestable pods, and the seeds are going to form in those pods that we'll be able to collect. We might have cut flowers that we want to save. This is a picture of a row of my cut flowers of zinnias. Zinnia elegans that I absolutely adore. I love these color palettes this year. And so this is one variety that I may want to save to be able to replant next year. And then the other pictures of a native. This one is gray-headed coneflower. And this is one that I love coming in my native plantings. I want to save seed and be able to reintroduce it into other native settings on my own property. But it's an easy one to collect from. Some easy vegetables. Again, when we're thinking about what is an easy one to start out with for beginners, we know that peas and beans are very easy to collect from. Tomatoes are easy to collect. Lettuce is easy once it goes to bolt. You can collect seeds. Peppers are another variety that is easy to collect from. And some of the easy flowers that I love to harvest from, um, and these pictures are zinnias and cosmos, but other things I love to collect are marigolds, um, cleome, nasturtium, poppy, snapdragons. If I have a cool variety, I love to get those little pods. Sunflowers are easy to collect seed from. And believe it or not, morning glory, it could be our gardener's friend or foe. But if you have a unique color for your morning glory, that might be one that you want to collect from also. That's pretty easy. So why are they easy to work with? A lot of times they're annuals, so they're going to go ahead and you'll be able to harvest them the same year. You don't have to worry about marking them. They're self-pollinated. They don't require isolation in some instances, and a few plants are needed to collect the seeds from. You can leave a couple of the fruits and still have plenty of seeds. If we're saving seeds, we also want to think about the self pollination. And this is one way that we can collect seeds and we can reduce the chance of undesirable crossbreeding. Um, it's best to only plant one heirloom variety of each plant if you're planning to save the seeds. But the caveat there might be that there's still a chance that, an insect might come in from another plant from your neighbor's garden if you're located fairly closely of the same species and introduce that to your garden. So with pollinators, they might sneak in, and visit regardless. So when we're thinking about saving some of those plants, we have to think about how are we going to do that? Are we going to select plants that are a certain color? Um, that is one way that we might want to select, but most assuredly, for you to have the healthiest and the strongest plant for the next year's crop, we really want to think about using those healthy plants. If you're having a disease outbreak or you're seeing powdery mildew or leaf spot, especially in zinnias, you want to be careful and not collect those seeds that might transmit any of those undesirable disease traits or any issue that might be going on, underlying issue. We want to make sure that they're very healthy plants. We want to make sure that we're collecting mature uh, open, fully mature seed heads. We don't want to have immature that's barely starting to bloom. They may not have the seeds fully mature in them. And we also want to mark our plants because as they start to maybe go to full maturity and brown, we might lose track of exactly the color that we were wanting to select for. And so a great way to mark your plants with little plant tags or even ribbons, like your marking flags that you can find at your farm supply store. They have pink and yellow and purple ribbons, and sometimes I will mark those plants with that. If we want to select some of our beans and peas, we want to let those pods dry on the vine until they're brown and crispy. Um, the beans should be hard. If we're filling inside, we should make sure that they're fully mature, that they're not soft and can be mushed to the touch. We can split those pods by hand um, and actually getting those pulled apart. They're ready for storage whenever they break with the hammer test. Uh, we also want to talk about using fresh, high quality seeds. We know the germination rates will vary a little bit, but we want to have the best germination by having those really quality seeds that we're saving. And we know that they can be stored for 2 to 3 years in a cool, dry place. But we don't want to have anything that you're going to just throw in, just throw them in a box and not do anything with them. Our germination rates on older, poorly stored seeds, even though that they were from healthy, reliable plants, it will be reduced germination rates, almost up to 50 to 70% could be a germination rate for them if we're not storing them correctly. So keep all that in mind whenever you start this process, because there is a little bit of work on collecting great seeds. Lettuce is one that we can harvest 2 to 3 weeks after they flower. You're going to see the flowers. You're going to see those little pods as they're closing up. They're making that seeds. They're going to become viable in there. You can use a paper bag method to collect the seeds and harvest multiple of those seed pods. You can go back multiple visits and collect multiple times throughout as they're bolting and flowering and reducing. You can do one visit if it's easier. But you want to remove some of the chaff by working through with a fine screen. You can rub it along and let it fall through and get that seeds. You don't want to collect all the chaff and put that in your bag if you don't need to. It's ready for storage when they break open. We want to use those high quality seeds so that we have a greater germination rate, but we know that it can be reduced if we store them incorrectly. Tomatoes are a great one that we can harvest. We really want those fruit to be harvested when they're truly, really ripe. If they're just turning from green to red, we want to wait. We want those seeds to become fully mature and that they are really viable seeds. So we can either do that with a wet seed harvest, and we'll talk more about that later in our slides. Kim will discuss that. Or we can take it and put it out and lay them out on paper towels and allow them to dry that way. But they're ready for storage when they break up to 4 weeks. And again, we want to make sure that we're storing them after we've removed any of the liquid from them and it's ripe. We can get them stored correctly. Zinnias, I'm a cut flower grower and I love incorporating zinnias into my garden and a lot of flowers. So this is some pictures I took. I'm looking for my zinnias to become that center, to become elongated. As you see here, you're going to see that they're kind of pillared up just a little bit. They're going to be ready to harvest whenever the petals of the flowers have turned brown and crispy. If there is a reason that you're needing to harvest, you at least want those seeds in that second picture to be plump and very full looking. You don't want them to be white. Those are going to be immature seeds. We want them to dry by cutting off the seed heads before they're fully dry and placing them into either a brown paper sack or into a cardboard box and allowing them to completely dry. You want them to dry for a few weeks and then they're able to be pulled apart, pulled some of that chaff away from them, and then you're able to store them for the remainder of the season. It might take from this picture, the second picture up into the last picture, it might take a week to 2 weeks as that's drying down and all that moisture is being removed from the seeds. Cosmos is another one. Cosmos is one that you're wanting to look at that star shaped on the bloom. It's going to flower. It's going to be a beautiful flower with all these petals, but then it's going to start to close up that seed head, and then those seeds are going to start to mature. As they mature, it's going to open up again, and it's actually going to look like a dried star shape before they kind of break apart and disperse out. So you're able to harvest those seeds as they start to open up and that star is starting to emerge out. Whenever you dry them, you can cut the seed heads off. Because they are a little more delicate in that star, you may want to hold your hand underneath them and then use your clippers to cut that seed head off and then drop it into again, a brown paper sack, or I'll even do a cardboard box and able to let it dry and remove some of that moisture before I package it up and write on it to store for the season. Again, being ready that it might take up to a couple weeks for it fully to become completely dry and open up and mature. Okay, I'm going to pass this along to Kim. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm still on my thing. I'm hitting on. I'm sorry. I seen a pink one and I thought, so how do we, Kim has some pictures on hers on how do we isolate varieties to prevent cross pollination. One of the reasons that she has this picture here with these pollinators that was on here is we need to think about the time that we're going to have before the pollinators actually arrive if we're going to do some cross pollination and we want to isolate varieties. We want to remove any contaminants that might occur. We want to have time for hand pollination. We don't want our visitors to beat us to that flower and pollinate it because then we're not sure of what exactly might happen with those isolated varieties. We also may want to add distance to our varieties and allow for that cross-pollination not to occur due to pollinators. So one technique that we can use for isolation is that we can put physical barriers around our plants themselves. We want to go ahead and use these organza bags. I like to use these as a physical barrier if I have just a few plants that I'm wanting to isolate in the beginning, or I can do a full row cover with a vinyl netting. If I want to isolate the whole row of plants. If you're isolating individual heads themselves, what you want to do is make sure that they have not fully started to emerge and open before you place the bags over them. If they're already starting to open and the petals are starting to twirl just a little bit, they may be a little further along and they might have had an opportunity for another pollinator to come in. So really being watchful and putting those row covers or the individual bags on as soon as possible is the key to be successful in that isolation. Another thing to think about when you're wanting to isolate it is the timing. If we see, if you're going out there to isolate, you may also want to do it in different layers. We may want to stagger plantings if we're worried about having multiple varieties. We may want to plant one row of it and go ahead and try to isolate that row and collect, hand pollinate. And then we may want to have a second succession planting. In case we weren't successful on that first go through it, we may want to do a second planting at a later date that might be like 4 weeks later, a month later, that it's going to bloom at a different very time and become mature at a different time. That gives us a second chance to actually go through it. If everything is harvesting and being able to be harvested at one time, that might be a little overwhelming, especially if you're beginning some of these isolation techniques. And so it's easier if you stagger those plantings just a little bit to give you some time to do one set and then do that second set. So some of the isolation techniques that you can use are some hand pollination. You want to ensure that the flower is pollinated by the correct plant. And so if you're taking that individual bag off or possibly even the whole row cover back, you want to make sure that you're using clean cotton swabs or a paintbrush. You're taking the pollen, transferring from one, you may be cutting off or wiping one set of stamen and going directly to the other petals, the stigma, and going ahead and transferring that pollen, and then from one to one, and then maybe changing out your paintbrush or wiping it off, or even adding the other side of your cotton swab to make sure that you're not gathering excessive pollen that you're not wanting to transfer. Completely covering back with your organza bags or the row cover, making sure that it's sealed correctly is important. Just making sure that you're being very diligent, taking it in just small amounts of time. So if you want to, you can, do it in multiple segments that way. I would do a little bit at a time, cover it, mark it that you're done, and then move to your next bag or your next one as you're working down the line. That way you're not accidentally hitting anything or transferring anything that you didn't want. Another way you can isolate is by distance. We know that self-pollinators require um, some distance between them. Tomatoes may only need a couple rows of distance apart with, just a few feet apart. We're staggering them through the garden, and you may be rotating them throughout your garden anyway. But you want to think about how much distance you have, especially you have items like oats. You need them to be 5 to 10 feet apart. Um, Insect pollinators that might have insects going to them. So beans, barley, and broccoli need to be 200 yards apart to really be true, to have that distance so that they're not having any cross contamination or any other issues. If they are wind pollinators, you really need to look at making sure that you're almost a mile apart. So if you have neighbors that are just at a fence row away from you or right across the lot from you, this may be an issue because beets, spinach, chard, and corn can be pollinated at least a mile apart in some instances. Another isolation technique might vary from variety to variety. And so we want you to be very successful. So we do have an info sheet that has some recommended isolation charts. Illinois Extension has created this for you to be able to use, and we will have this as one of your handouts that you'll be able to do. And we have another excellent source, a resource that you can use whenever you're working with collecting your seeds and wanting to distance and isolate. The Seed Savers Exchange here with this website has more information that can kind of work for you as you're selecting varieties to try this out with. When we're thinking about distance, we also need to think about how we're planting. This is um, when we're setting up our garden. If you know you want to set up your garden where you're going to isolate and you want to collect, you want to think about how you're positioning your rows so that you're able to manage between them if you're allowing walkways and distance between them. We know that certain things require 10 to 20 feet between them, but can I place other varieties in between it? And do I have the space to be able to do this? If you don't have the space, then that might make a difference. So really looking at isolation and how you position your garden when you're doing the rows will make you the most successful at keeping distances between items. And this is another cut flower bed. As you can see, this was using some of our polyculture, the weed berry that had some holes burned into it. And if you're wanting to select, as this is one solid variety that you're wanting to collect, you may want to also think about netting those cohorts and making those runs and blocks of color available in easier patterns, right? If you're covering it with your row covers, it may be easier to do one whole block of color opposed to doing multiple blocks within, and you're having to roll down and have chances of bumping it. So to set your garden up as easy as you can, you want to go ahead and net it as easy and plant it in these blocks of color that will help you out. Some breeders, whenever they're doing it, they may have even a low caterpillar tunnel underneath or above your rows, and then they would put low row covers inside of that as a secondary containment area, and then they'll order blue bottle flies as pollinators to go in if they don't want to hand pollinate, but to actually pollinate under the nettings. So as you become maybe just a more experienced gardener or more experience as starting to hybridize in a larger scale, know that there's other techniques out there that you can utilize, especially if you're wanting to do large numbers and quantities at one time. So, and with that, I'm going to kind of pass it on to Kim to let her kind of talk about what are the methods to use.
Thanks, Chris. So Chris touched on this with some of the easy plants to grow. So we know that lettuce and beans and peas would be a dry harvest, whereas tomatoes will be a wet harvest. And I'll try to explain what that's like moving forward in this part of the slide deck. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the pictures here. So the first is just a pile of dried hazelnuts, and so these seeds were removed from their husk once they were mature. And then the other picture is a person holding wild plums that were collected. Wild plums will definitely require a wet harvest, and it's a pretty intensive process. You would have to remove the pits from the fleshy pulp. And once the pits have dried, you would actually use a tool to crack the pit to reveal that smaller hard seed for those wild plums. And so with these dry harvest examples, the beans, peas, onions, carrot, corn, flowers, and herbs is most of what we will talk about. So anytime you're getting a dry harvest, you are waiting for those seeds to become mature on that plant, that parent plant. Most of the time, you'll be cutting those seed heads before they're fully dry, but you have to see signs for each type of plant that they are finished growing and that you're just waiting for that drying process. Most of the time, you're drying for a few weeks. And what I would recommend always is err on the side of caution and dry it a little longer if you're not sure if the seed is dry. Basically, you're waiting to thresh those seeds or break open the pods to release those seeds to separate them from the chaff. In some species, it can be as simple as shaking them in a bag or rubbing them. Chaff does have the potential to hold moisture, and so that's why, again, cleaning your seed can make a big difference in that storage process. So a wet harvest example. So when we're talking about those tomatoes, we notice that tomato is a very fleshy fruit and it has a gel casing around that seed. And so we're scooping or crushing that gel of seeds from that fruit to release those seeds. Typically, you would put them in a jar with a small amount of water, and you're actually using fermentation to help break that gel casing around the seed coat away from the seed. That gel actually will inhibit germination, and so that's why sometimes you can have better luck using a wet harvest method versus just drying them on a piece of paper towel. So basically, you are making once you put it in the jar, you're stirring it daily, and usually you're only allowing it to ferment for 2 to 4 days. When you're decanting, you are removing the pulp and the floating seeds that are not viable, and you're discarding that. You are keeping those viable seeds that have sunk to the bottom of the jar, and from there, you're spreading it on a paper towel, a coffee filter, or a screen to dry. In the case of a tomato, it usually takes 2 to 4 weeks for it to be fully dry. With cucumber is ready to harvest when the fruit is overripe. So you wanted to pick a cucumber that looks a little bit like this, where it's starting to turn yellow. It might be a little mushy on the vine. You left it a little bit too long. And so you would do that fermentation mold process again. And the seeds are ready for storage when they break using a hammer test. And so that literally is, you could take a hammer and take that seed and try to smash the seed. If it breaks into multiple pieces, it's shattered. If it's just been squished, it's not dry. And so you would want to continue drying it a little bit longer. For cucumbers, Usually fresh, high quality seed that you would purchase from the store would have a 90 to 95% germination rate. So within that first year of you harvesting and storing those seeds, you could expect to have pretty good germination the following year. As you keep holding on to those seeds, it will decrease its germination rate over time. So over 3 years, you'll lower your germination rate between 20 and 40%. After that point, or if you unfortunately stored your seeds incorrectly, you could have a lower germination rate. With pumpkins cross with other squash, zucchini, and gourds. So I just want to remind you guys that isolation or hand pollination is really important if you're trying to save a certain variety of pumpkin. These guys are mature seeds after you harvest the pumpkin. And so once you scoop the seeds out of the inside of the fruit, they're ready to go. You just have to remove some of that pulp. And this is one of the wet harvest that does not need fermentation. You would just scoop from that fruit. You really want to save 3 times more pumpkin seeds than the number of plants you'll be growing because they tend to have poorer germination. Anytime that you're drying your seeds, again, you want to lay a single layer of those seeds on a tray for 1 to 2 weeks. I always recommend keeping seeds in a cool, dry place outside of that direct sunlight to help them with that drying process. You know if they're dry if you cannot dent those seeds with your fingernails. And typically seeds can be saved from 4 to 6 years. So how do you properly store seed? Really, you're trying to prevent mold or rot. So again, making sure that your seeds are fully dry to start with is really important. Keep them in a cool, dry place. Paper envelopes or paper bags are useful for short-term storage. If you wanted to do long-term storage, I would consider using a glass jar and even potentially using the refrigerator to keep those seeds going. Always remember to label your container or your bag or envelope with the plant name, the variety, and the harvest date so that you can keep track of your germination tests to understand if that variety or if that seed is still useful to you. So in case you aren't aware of the germination test, this is a very simple experiment that you could conduct at home. Typically, the easiest way to do this would take 10 seeds from whatever variety you're growing. You would put them in a Ziploc bag on top of a paper towel that you would moisten with a little bit of water. Using a Sharpie, you'd be able to write down that variety that you're testing. And basically, you can set it on top of your refrigerator where it will give off a little bit of heat, and then you wait for that to germinate. Usually, you can look up online pretty easily with your plant variety how long it takes for that particular variety of plant to germinate. But most of the time, a 2-week time period will be enough time to let you know if they are going to germinate. So you would check those seeds every single day until the last date of your expected germination, and you would calculate that rate. So if you had 9 out of 10 seeds that germinated, you would multiply that by 100 to get a 90% germination rate. And so when you're interpreting your germination test results, looking at that percentage will help you understand whether you want to sow those seeds in your garden or whether it might be time to go pick up a new seed packet from the store to plant. So if you have 90 to 100% germination rate, it's going to be excellent. You would plant as expected from the back of a seed packet, and you can always look up those varieties online to get direction on spacing. If you have between 75 and 89% germination rate, you may want to plant a little bit thicker and plan to thin your seedlings so that you have enough of the variety that you're growing. When you're under 75%, that's when you have to make some decisions on, again, whether you would want to purchase some seeds If you want to save some money or you have extra space in your garden, it may be worth overseeding at a thicker rate. But if you're below 50% germination rate, I would say it is going to put you behind in your garden because you'll have to continue planting where those seeds aren't coming up. And so if you wanted to calculate lower germination, you can compensate by sowing more seeds per your spot. You would take the desired number of plants divided by that germination rate to get your seeds to plant. So with some seeds, keep in mind with parsley or peppers, they have a lower slow germination, even when they're fresh. As seeds age, they can lose their vigor. And so some of those seedlings may be weaker when they germinate if you've saved really old seed too. So now that you've tested your seed and you have a sense of its viability, it's important to remember that not all of our seeds are going to germinate easily and right away. And so that kind of leads us to what is seed stratification. Some seeds will require a temperature or moisture change to trigger the end of dormancy or their sleep period. And so this process is where seed is mixed with moistened inert material. Some people use sawdust, builder sand, vermiculite, peat moss, and it's normally stored at 34 to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. You also might sow directly in pots or flats, but you have to keep them moist. And so that stratification is mimicking that natural condition for the seed to break dormancy. This is a photo of a compass plant with its seeds reaching up to be collected. A lot of our annual garden flowers and vegetables don't require stratification. The exception would be asparagus, since it's a perennial. Many native trees, shrubs, and herbaceous perennials will only germinate after their seeds are stratified. And so that's important implications for pollinator plantings or native restorations. And that's where I kind of come into seed saving and why I enjoy it. Before working with Extension, I worked with the Nature Conservancy and harvested a lot of native seed at Nachusa grasslands. So I'm really passionate about seed collection. So if you wanted to improve your germination, just keep in mind that seeds may be dormant for different biological reasons, and there are germination codes that are going to tell you what treatment your seed needs to sprout. And this will help you avoid wasting time and maybe wasting using too many seeds. So germination codes usually reveal whether the seed has a hard coat and will need scarification. Usually for scarification, you might be using a sandpaper on that seed, a hot water bath, or an acid bath. There could be an internal chemical block, which would require that seed to have that cold and moisture. Sometimes there's a need for a light and darkness period, or a combination of those. And Prairie Moon Nursery, I highly recommend checking them out. And again, we have a handout that shares how they germinate their native seeds. But you can see they have 15 different codes. And so seed by seed or species by species, that's really important to terse out if you want to have success with planting those collected native plants. And so I'm going to go through a few species that I collect in my own backyard that are easy to harvest and then grow. So wild columbine, you'll notice here that the pods of the plant will be green and they will turn to a light brown or tan color. The pod texture will become dry and papery, and you can even hear those seeds rattle. It was really hard to take a picture of this, but if you grow this at home and you took a look straight down the center of those pods, you'll see the hard black seed when they're ready to be harvested. Once they are starting to rattle, though, if you have any windstorms or the pods themselves will kind of start to tip over, you will lose those seeds. So that might be a time that if you like to set it and forget it, putting an organza bag on this plant and collecting it when it's totally dry, you won't lose any of those small black seeds. Anytime you're harvesting native seeds, I recommend putting them on a paper plate or on a screen and letting them sit in that dry, cool place with air circulation for at least 2 weeks before you start putting them into storage. Golden Alexander, once those yellow flower fades, that flower umbel will form small oval green seeds. Wait until they turn a dark chocolate brown. That's when they'll be more ready to be harvested. The seeds themselves will feel hard. They'll be dry to the touch and have easy release from that structure. These will dry well in 7 to 14 days. Something to keep in mind is that these seeds are a little bit more oily than some of the others that you would collect. And so that's when they're fresh. As they dry, that oil kind of dissipates. And so the outer coating of this seed will look very dull. For wild bergamot, this plant will dry for 7 to 14 days, and you're trying to harvest it when the petals of the flower have turned brown and crispy. I always recommend that you look down the stem of the plant, and the darker brown, the better. You can see there's tiny small holes in that flower head, and that's where the tiny gray to black seeds will fall out. So this is another opportunity where if you wanted to cover it in a paper bag, you won't lose as much seed as it's drying. You can tap seed heads onto a paper plate and to help separate the seeds and store them for, again, up to 2 weeks for drying purposes. And then this is another species of Monarda, spotted bee balm, and you can see how the plants look similar with their flower heads. Wait until that entire flower head is brown. So sometimes the flowers are going to bloom at different times, and in order for all the seeds to be mature, you just want to wait. River oats, this is a plant that you can find pretty easily in southern Illinois. You want to wait for the seed heads to turn from this green color to a brown color. I just took these pictures this past weekend and I was out in Kentucky, and the seeds to me weren't quite ready yet. So you can see in that lower left-hand corner, they're starting to turn brown, but they'll even turn a darker tan shade. The seeds inside that spikelet will feel firm and dry. I would harvest the entire inflorescence in that lower left-hand picture and just let it continue to dry. And once the seeds fall off the inflorescence, they'll be ready to go. For bottle brush grass, I wanted to put these two pictures side by side. These were taken about a month apart. And so again, really pay attention to the color of those seeds. It's really difficult, and it would be really disappointing to harvest your seeds too soon. So in the picture on the right, you can still see that while the seed head has a cast where it is a little bit of a golden color, you can still see a lot of green. Whereas on the left-hand side, you have a perfect golden brown color. And if you were to just touch your hand on that inflorescence on that spikelet, they'll fall right off. These I usually just harvest and store in a paper bag and just make sure that I toss the seed in the paper bag every once in a while so that it gets some air circulation. Any of our milkweeds, you would be able to collect pretty easily. It's best to wait until the seed pod itself is splitting open. In this case, you would be able to run your fingers down the coma, which is that soft fluff, and you'd be able to have the seeds drop in your paper bag. If you harvest the entire pod when it's split and you keep the fluff, there are multiple ways that you can kind of remove that from your storage. Some people like to put them in large buckets and put a screen over the top of them that would not allow the seed heads to fly through, and you can use a shop vac to scoop that fluff out. In other cases, it's easier to just separate the seeds from the coma before you are actually going to store those seeds. Most of our milkweed seeds also are going to appreciate a cold, moist stratification for 30 to 60 days. So this would be one that you would want to keep moist, but not soaked in your fridge with some inert material. These guys typically, if you were going to dry them to save them and not plant them right away, they could be dry within 7 to 10 days. For rattlesnake master, always wait until they are fully dry. So you can see in that far right-hand picture, that stem is turning brown. The seed pods are dark brown. Really wait until you're seeing that chocolate color. If you were to remove some of the seeds on the top of that seed head, immature seeds will be soft and pale, whereas mature seeds are going to be that dark brown color. They will start to break apart and be rubbed. Because they're so spiny, it may be best to use gloves or a rolling pin on a paper plate to help kind of separate the seeds from the chaff. For Illinois bundleflower, you'll want to wait for the seed pods to turn brown and dry. Many of our legumes will curl and split open, and so the seeds will explode and move to a new place and kind of plant themselves. And so what's really important is to bag seed heads or let them finish drying in a in a place and space where if you put them on a rack, I would cover them with a piece of newspaper or butcher paper because the seeds are going to explode to help them stay in the same place. And just remember with that air circulation, moving those single layer of seeds around to help them fully dry. These guys can dry within 7 to 10 days. And this is one where I would really, really recommend this and partridge pea, waiting for it to dry as much as you can, keeping that dark chocolate color, because if the seeds aren't mature, they won't germinate for you. These guys will benefit from a little bit of scarification, and they will want hot boiling water baths to be able to germinate. And so usually you'll do that by pouring that boiling water on your seeds, letting it sit from 12 to 24 hours to cool down. The other option for scarification would be rubbing each individual seed with sandpaper to get it to germinate. And so here's that picture of partridge pea. So this one looks like it would be close to harvest, but I would still urge you to look at that stem. The stem, I'm still seeing a lot of red. I would wait and let it get a darker brown color. And so again, the pods will twist open on a partridge pea once they're mature and dried. And this is a neat plant that won't require boiling water, but just hot water and a soak that is about 24 hours. For purple coneflower, you would let the flower head dry on the plant until it's a dark brown, like in the left-hand picture. You could cut the entire seed head and place it in a paper bag until you're ready to separate the seeds from the chaff. You can see in the picture to the right where some of the seeds are falling out, indicated by that open white area. You got to be careful at this time because this is when the birds are going to eat your seeds. And so you may want to do a harvest to be able to extend those plants in your garden. If you look in that same picture on the right, there are seeds that are not ready. That center cone is dark green and it's not really brown at all. So you would want to wait for those plants. These will dry in about 7 to 14 days, and do not keep them in direct sunlight or heat, as it will lower their germination rates. For gray-headed coneflower, you would want to wait until the seed heads turn brown or gray. What I love harvesting about this plant is when you crush that seed head in your hand, it'll smell like citrus. And so it's just kind of fun to be able to do. You want those seeds to be dry and hard to the touch, and it should be easy to crumble with your fingers. If it's not easy to do that, it probably needs more time drying on that plant. Obviously, those petals, those yellow ray flowers have since fallen off, and you're just looking for that really, really dark seed head. These guys will dry in about 7 to 14 days and will also need a cold stratification to germinate. For tall coreopsis, you want to make sure that the seeds are completely dry to maintain their viability. They will also need a cold stratification process. And so with these photos here, you can see the photo on the right. You have a plant that is not ready to be harvested. It's not even turning brown yet. You are seeing some of the petals are disappearing and falling off, and you're seeing a yellow color kind of turning to tan, but you're waiting for those seed heads to turn chocolate brown to black. And the birds will go after these guys quite a bit too. And so you may want to cut when you see that the majority of the stem of this plant is brown, and let them dry indoors. Downy sunflower. These guys were just on the cusp. I just took these pictures less than a week ago. So you can see that the seed heads are going to turn brown. They want to be plump and firm. I've had goldfinches just going to town on them. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to save very many of them this year. But if you look on that outside of the sepal of the plant, you would wait for the sepals to be dark brown, as well as that interior of the gray flower. And these guys will dry in 7 to 14 days. The seeds will be hard, dry, and can be striped like our sunflower seeds. These may benefit from some scarification, but they don't need cold stratification. And last, I wanted to talk about two of our blazing star species. So dense blazing star, our flower spikes will turn brown and dry. They'll be tiny little fluffs, kind of like dandelions, and the seeds are ready when the fluff is dry and easily detaches. And so I took this picture a week ago, and it's outside of our Franklin County Extension office, and it was just after a rain. I would highly recommend waiting until those inflorescences totally dried out before seed collecting, just because they can store so much moisture. And so again, when you're seed collecting, this might be a late afternoon or evening activity just in general, so that you can make sure that all the dew is gone from those plants. And with these types of plants, just keep in mind that as they're flowering, they flower. It's called acropetal flowering, where it's going to flower from the top to the bottom. So the timing at which you collect the seed head, you may want to wait until the bottom of your plant has finished flowering and is also developed mature seeds. And so this rust blazing star kind of shows you that picture where in those top flowers, you have really big puffs, but the bottom part of that plant still looks to have purple flowers on it, and there is no seed production happening at this time. So once you wait for that to occur, these should also be dry in about 2 weeks. And these require cold, moist stratification to do well. And so these were just a few species that we wanted to talk about today. We have a lot of resources that are available to you. So from Illinois Extension, we have a How to Save Seeds info sheet that really highlights important facts from our presentation today. We have a seed viability and germination info sheet. Something we didn't talk to you about today, but we have an info sheet on pelleted seed and how you can use that. There are so many other local workshops, webinars, and blogs you could participate in. Prairie Moon Nursery has those great germination codes that I recommend that you investigate. And Seed Savers Exchange really has a wealth of knowledge between their isolation distance chart, their seed saving guide, their webinars, and their yearbook. So if you enjoy saving seeds, these are some of those top resources for you to check out. So if you wanted to view any of our past recordings of our 4 Seasons Gardening series, you can go on our YouTube page and check us out. Our webinar will be posted to YouTube once our closed captioning is complete. And we'd love it if you could take this brief survey. We have a QR code that you can scan, or you can go to this link, go.illinois.edu, seed shaker, and I'll leave that up for a few seconds. And just wanted to thank everybody for coming today. And I guess we'll start answering some of those questions in the chat.